Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this is a series that I am going to have a lot of fun doing. This is about the different sun signs of the zodiac as parents and also as children. So I'm going to combine each sign, Aries parent, Aries child, for this particular video. And you can listen. It won't have a timestamp because I'm going to be going back and forth between talking about the parent and child, even though I will be concentrating my remarks about each of them at a certain point in the recording, but you know what I mean. It's not going to be that clear cut. So anyway, I'm going to put this disclaimer in front of all the videos that I am not a parent. I have studied child development extensively because I was planning on becoming an early childhood educator, and I have worked as a teacher's assistant. But more than that, if anybody says, oh, well, why should I take your advice? I'm not asking anybody to take my advice. I never do. But I just want to let you know that I've been a child and I know what it's like to be treated in a certain way that is not what I consider to be particularly sensitive, compassionate, and understanding of, what children are all about. And so the other thing I want to state is that I'm also of the belief that hitting a child is wrong in any case. It doesn't matter how hard the child is being hit. As a matter of fact, even saying that really bothers me because I feel like if you're going to be a good role model for your child, you have to model restraint. Physical restraint is one of the first and foremost types of forms of self-mastery for a child, because especially when they're very young, they do have a tendency to lash out physically. But that's due to immaturity. And as we get older, we're supposed to have self-control. And I do feel that a lot of physical punishment, if you will, is based on the adult's own ego issues and anger management issues than it ever is about anything that's supposed to actually instruct a child and teach them how to, I wouldn't say behave themselves, but how to conduct themselves. I guess that's the same thing, right? But I don't know, there's something about the word behave is like mind the adult. Well, sometimes the adults are just as immature, if not more so, than the child. It all comes from this mentality that children are less than and that they don't have the same rights. And actually, we should be more protective of children because they are helpless in a lot of ways. So that's where I'm coming from. So in terms of the Aries parents, as their positive influences, being a parent, Aries is a cardinal fire sign, so it's the first sign of the zodiac. So there's a lot of freshness, there's authenticity. What you see is what you get, usually from an Aries person. Obviously, there are other astrological influences that can definitely color the personality. If an Aries person has a moon in Scorpio, this can be a little bit different. They may not show their whole hand at all times. So I'm not saying this across the board. And actually, I was going to call this Aries sun and moon because the moon sign can dominate when it comes to how they raise their children and how they act as a parent in general. So if you happen to be listening for your moon sign, then I think that's pretty appropriate. But these are people who are bad liars, and that's a good thing. It means that they are pretty authentic. They are pretty much, you can see they're very upfront about who they are. They're very honest about that, and they're also I keep saying they, if you are this type of parent, you're also like a big kid. You're very playful. You're very spontaneous. And that's wonderful in working with children. And when I say working, I mean dealing with them, even as a parent dealing with your own children, where you are somebody who can be just like them in a lot of cases, where you can just like, and this goes along with being creative, which all the fire signs naturally are. So that creativity of being able to make believe and to create certain scenarios, or maybe even crafts, things that children just love to do, you're already one step ahead of them, and you're willing to do things like that. And so you're a lot of fun because of that as a parent. You're one of the cool parents, the parents that, seems to actually enjoy being a parent. Even though, I will say that Aries does tend to have, I don't know if I'd say trouble committing to relationships, but they may be unlikely to early on in their adulthood, like in their 20s. They may be more, better suited as parents in their 30s, once they have been able to sow their own wild oats, be able to have their own adventures as single people and enjoy that, and then get to the point where they would like to share it with a partner and then raise a family. So I think that some of the more, the shadow elements of Aries as a parent are going to be more the case when the Aries parent blames the child for ruining their life, for cutting off their freedom, if they're very young, for cutting off their youth, where they didn't get to be footloose and fancy free. And that can lead to a lot of negative behaviors towards the child that I will get to in a minute. But otherwise, I think that Aries can make wonderful parents in many ways. Aries people are competitive, adults are competitive, and children are too. But so that can, I put that in the positive column, although that can work both ways. I don't really think being competitive is a good thing, but let me put it this way. They're dynamic. Okay. So there's they're very active, and this is very contagious in a good way. If you've ever, you're probably an Aries watching this. So unless you're watching for your Aries child or listening for them, but, I always feel like this energy boost being next to Aries people because of that, dynamic vibe of theirs. Just general positivity as a fire sign. An Aries person tends to tell their child, you can do it, you've got this, rather than being overly cautious and worrying too much about their child getting hurt. The Aries parent will be more likely to encourage their child to take risks. And so there's like that adventurous quality in them. And that can lead, I feel, to children not being, crybabies that much, because I think a lot of times the children that tend to cry at the drop of a hat every time they, fall down, even when it's something minor, is because they're anticipating the fear of the parents. And there's like a fearless quality in Aries, so they're not going to worry too much about their child's well-being. And that, I think overall that's actually a good thing. These are very, and by the way, I think it's very important to be positive with your children in general. So encouraging them, not being overly critical, but just very encouraging, that they keep trying, they don't give up, they'll do better next time and things like that. And in terms of being active, I think that's wonderful because it can encourage the child to exercise, and doing so in just a natural sort of way, where it's not like, okay, now we have to go to the gym. It's like, hey, let's go out for a bike ride after dinner. And, the Aries person tends not to be a couch potato. Again, this is going to be colored. If they have inner planets in Taurus, they may be more comfortable lounging around, but they're not going to be the typical, they'll at least have more balance. But, Aries people can be very energetic to the point where they have to really let off a lot of steam. And they're generous. And this is, I think positivity, generosity is not just with the wallet, it's with the spirit. So not honing in on the flaws of a child, but playing up their best attributes is one form of generosity. But then with the cold hard cash, they can be the kind of parent who dotes on their child, wants to give them the moon and the sun. And, other parents might look at them and say, oh, they're spoiling their child, but they're just wanting their child to be able to enjoy the fruits of their labor, that the parents labor. So there's nothing wrong with that, unless it's like totally excessive, then that could create a distortion. But I think in general, they have a lot of wonderful attributes in, speaking especially with dealing with children because of those qualities. Some of the shadow elements or the negatives of the Aries parent, one of them is impatience. And having worked in a school before, I have seen when teachers are impatient and what that creates, or even in my own life, growing up. And what happens is that it is totally lacking sensitivity to how all children are different. And you cannot push somebody to do something or to understand a concept that they just simply do not in this moment. And you have to have patience. If you don't, with children, what happens is they start to feel very anxious that that you're going to yell at them, that they're going to be disappointing you, and that creates its own negative chain of events. And the next phrase I wrote down was short fuse, and that goes along with impatience. So the Aries person in general tends to have a short fuse. Now again, the moon in Aries is going to especially demonstrate this. But all Aries people can be very hot-headed as fire signs, but especially Aries because it is ruled by Mars, and Mars is, so much into the immediacy, taking action and all that stuff. And also anger is related to Mars, war. And so the Aries parent can get very bent out of shape very easily. And actually, all these words that I'm writing here are pretty well connected, because then I wrote down the word immature. I think fire signs, again, since I'm one of them, I can say this without, being too worried that anybody's going to write me a nasty comment and say, oh, you're picking on Aries. No, this is true of all fire signs, which is kind of like, it kind of pisses me off sometimes as a fire sign and as a so-called mature adult, that we are viewed as immature because we are spontaneous, because we are very independent. That was a word that I should have mentioned too, is that, as a positive of an Aries parent is that they model independence. And so therefore resourcefulness goes along with that. If you think of the Magician card, it's actually in the Tarot, it's actually connected to Aries. And resourcefulness, it's like you have all you need. You don't have to be dependent on others all the time. And children need to learn resourcefulness, especially nowadays, because we have a lot of helicopter parents who want to rush in and overprotect their children. protecting children is always important, but overprotection creates an underlying sense of anxiety within the child, and over dependence where the child doesn't know how to do something on their own. And so that's a positive quality. But the immaturity is due to having a short fuse, but also the spontaneity, all these things, living in the moment can, this is what we associate with children, is that they live in the moment. It's being very capricious. That can lead to an impatience leading to rash behavior. And that is not, that is a form of immaturity, because when you are more mature, you're able to withstand your impulses and not just act, out of habit, but be able to like resist the temptation to do something simply for the sake of doing it, because you are so restless that it's hard for you to kind of like just be and not have to act and do. So to me, that's all connected. You can even say like hyperactivity and things like that. I would say insensitivity is a big one as well. Aries in general can be quite brusque, can be quite, again, that impatience. Sometimes if I'm talking to somebody, I don't know what sign they are. It might be, like a stranger, and you're having this conversation that's very terse. The person, you're trying to talk and they're just kind of cutting you off because they want you to get to the point, but then that makes you more flustered. And, so there's an insensitivity there where, and that comes from self-absorption too, which is kind of like one of those negative Aries traits of, I'm not going to be afraid of saying the word negative in this series, because I just want to get across the more challenging aspects. But it's okay to say negative once in a while. But so not having that sense of compassion and emotional connection. Fire signs tend to be very self-oriented and, dare I say, self-absorbed, or, and it makes it hard sometimes to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else. So the self-centered viewpoint sees everything from your eyes, and you have to see that you're not the center of the universe, that there are other people and they have other ways of coping with life. So if an Aries parent, and also I put down pushing the child too hard. If the Aries parent has a child who is a Cancer, maybe especially a Cancer or a Pisces, they have to be especially sensitive to their needs, even if it is kind of against your nature to be that way. You have to be able to tune into how they feel. They may be very fearful. There are some, and I'm limiting it to those two signs, but there might be others. Any sign can have these attributes, because again, we're not just our sun signs, and there are other, like, if you have the sun in the 12th house, you might even have these karmic situations that come up. And so being able to tune into their needs as individuals, being more gentle. So again, when I was talking about punishment before, that could be like that the parent is pretty rough with their child, especially when they get angry, to be sensitive to the fact that everyone is just trying to get their needs met in life. And sometimes people do heinous things to try to get their needs met. But usually with children, it's either some form of, naughty behavior, or, talking back to the parent because They're hungry, irritable, scared about something that they are afraid to tell the parent about. Be the kind of parent that your child doesn't fear, that they know that they can go to and you're not going to explode and things like that. Don't push them. Don't be too ambitious for your child, competitive, because of your ego being out of control and that you want to, be able to show off your child to others as, look at, what this child is. That can happen when the parent doesn't feel accomplished in their own right, that they want to kind of like hold their child up as this, superior specimen versus other people that they know. Don't do that. Don't push them to become what you want them to become. Don't be self-centered. Really tune into what their talents are, what their interests are. Now let's talk about the Aries child. Well, I guess I could probably put a time stamp, but I might reference the Aries parent again. This child will be probably very active, and some adults may call them hyperactive. Be very careful about this because you don't want them treated like there's something wrong with them just because they're very active. A good way to kind of like gauge this for yourself is to have a day, maybe on a weekend, where they're getting like tons of physical activity and see how they, react at night. See if they sleep well, if they go to sleep at the regular bedtime, because chances are they just may need extra physical activity. And you know how the public school system is today. It's really ridiculous with that. So whether it's, an alternative form of school where they are given way more physical activity, because let me tell you something. I know that, a private school is going to cost more money, is going to actually cost a tuition and things like that. But I'll tell you, the way that a lot of these schools, they just like demand that these children stay in their seats for hours and hours at a time. That's terrible to me. I know I'm giving my own 2 cents here, but I just feel like these types of children have to kind of really work it out, And if you must have them in public school, then make sure that they are having after school activities that involve sports and things like that, where they can really just get out all that excess energy. These children are going to naturally be competitive, and this may be in the form of with their siblings. This is why it's very important not to compare these children to others. It's always important for all parents never to compare your children. That's really cruel. And it also, what it does too is it also makes them angry at each other because they feel like, one is resenting the other. So it destroys their relationship too. So it's really a bad practice. It's done a lot of times because it's very effective. Every child wants to feel like they are okay, that they're successful, that their parents accept them. And so in any case, you can use this in a good way. You can teach the child how to compete with themselves. In other words, if they, like to run, have a stopwatch and say, let's see if you can run faster this time. They will really take to that. Sometimes if they do have an inclination to be interested in sports, let them do that because they will learn the parameters, the lessons of good sportsmanship. And personally, I am against parents putting their children in Little League, without asking the child, just assuming that they're just going to go into it. But if the child shows an interest in sports, by all means do that, because I think that this will really help an Aries child. because they will enjoy the competition, but they will also learn how to play fair and to take a loss, without being a jerk about it and things like that. Speaking of being a jerk, the Aries child can have tantrums. And again, just like an Aries parent can have tantrums too, because they have that short fuse. And you can imagine if you see a little kid in the store who's red in the face and kicking and screaming, maybe they have an Aries sun or an Aries moon. And this is because they want their own way. This is true of Aries. Why do Aries people want their own way? Because they are ruled by Mars, and Mars is the god of war, but also dealing with courage. In war you have to have courage, and that sense of being, how can I put it, like you're guiding your way through life. When Mars is our guide, it drives us to do this or to do that. And by the way, Mars is an inner planet, so it tends to be, not all the time though, when it goes retrograde, it can go far away from the sun, but it can stick fairly close to the sun. So there's every chance, if your sun is in Aries, you might have Mars in Aries as well. And that would, really make you quite Martian-like or Aryan-like. That sense of, kind of like your, what's the say, is like piloting your own ship, or I think I'm mixing metaphors. I meant steering your own ship, I guess. But anyway, so this makes these kinds of, this particular sign very like, and being a fire sign too, being very much like knowing what they want. And so they don't want that interference. And then being a cardinal sign, there's always kind of a bossiness with cardinal signs, because they want to take action. Other people are not as interested, as keen on taking action. And so Aries just jumps up and says, I'm going to be the one to move things along here. Again, that impatience, wanting to see results, wanting to do things. This child may also be a roughhouser. We could say boys, but girls too. By the way, if you have a girl who is an Aries, understand that she's going to probably be a tomboy, because Aries is a masculine sign. Again, there are other factors that may mitigate this a bit. But chances are she's going to want to do what the boys do. She may even want to hang around boys, and that should be okay. Don't discourage her from doing something because you associate it with the opposite gender, and let her really do what she wants to do, because there's a pioneering spirit with Aries. And these people at all ages have a real sense of, wanting to be like the first. Aries is the first sign. So they really have a lot of initiative, and they want to take that initiative, and they can feel very frustrated when they're kind of stymied by somebody else, like an adult. So if a female Aries wants to try to be the first girl to do something that, is atypical of a girl, let her do it and kind of encourage her all the way. Aries children, give Aries children a choice. This is something that is mentioned for children that tend to be a little bit difficult and want, who tend to want things their own way. It can help to stem that frustration that they have. So you choose what two things that they can choose from, whether it's two things to wear, two things to eat, whatever. But you give them this illusion that they are choosing, and actually it isn't an illusion. They are getting a choice. It's just that they don't get to do whatever they want. By the way, one thing I want to say, if you are a Pisces parent in particular, be very careful not to let your child run all over you, walk all over you, because Pisces tends to be rather passive, and you might be a very lax parent. And I mean, I will delve into this more when I talk about Pisces parents. But the problem is Aries children, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And I had said at the beginning about not hitting children. That doesn't mean that you let children do whatever they want. And I should have stated that at the beginning. You do have to make sure that they are, that children are operating within a certain, framework that is suitable for your family and your lifestyle and your values. And being firm is incredibly important. Being too authoritarian, is not good, because that will cause the child to rebel, especially an Aries child. If you're a parent and you have an Aries child, it isn't about being lax and letting them have their temper tantrum and then giving them what they want because you just want to avoid another temper tantrum. It's about being firm and consistent in what you do, but being reasonable. Being too strict with an Aries child is a recipe for disaster. Being too lax with an Aries child is a recipe for disaster. They're two extremes. You don't want to go there. So anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this. And if you'd like a personal reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.